There's so much about this war that can't be discussed in public. And when we got involved in what's now called AI in parts of the DoD, unnamed parts, because Silicon Valley's view of technology was please send it to the adversaries and send the carcinogens to America and the allies. If you're getting really rich, why should everyone have a good life too? We took a different path, which was, and so when they abandoned the US government's efforts to build AI in the war context, we had a lot of trepidation about getting involved because this was like 5-6 years ago, and AI, as it was until a couple years ago, was really a bumper sticker for fraudsters, half fraudsters, and people selling snake oil. And when you're in software, you have to be very, very careful not be proximate to that because it all looks like a PowerPoint. Now, I could hand out unnamed companies where I know the software doesn't exist, and they would have a PowerPoint largely copied. They would figure out what we're doing and print it up. It'd look better. The people pitching it to you will look nicer, better. In the American context, they have whiter teeth. In this context, they have a better swim style or something that's very appealing. In the digitalization of warfare a number of years ago, at the same time, we were already still maintaining products that we had built largely for the West, but particularly used in Europe because you have an environment where data protection and anti-terror work has to go hand in hand. And that gave us an architecture for understanding how an enterprise would work with segmented data. So you just have a huge, typically everyone's excited about AI because it's not a joke, it's clearly transformative, and you're seeing the results of OpenAI in the consumer internet context. I would maintain that the history of technology from certainly in the last 100 years is things coming from the military going to consumer. And that's also what I think primarily actually has happened in AI, where, and again, our role in Ukraine has been widely discussed. Won't say that much about it, but as a matter of theory, the old way of targeting where you don't use, where algorithms aren't used is clearly a failure. And if you go into battle with old school technology, even if you're spending $65 billion a year and you're highly accomplished warfighters like Russia, and you have an adversary that knows how to install and implement digitalized targeting in AI, you obviously are at a massive disadvantage. But which the world heard, and that's why there's a lot of interest in AI. But what's very interesting is the way we discuss AI in public networks, consumer internet, doesn't actually translate to private networks. So if you're doing digitalization or AI on healthcare records or in the context of war, you have issues of, in the war fighting context, you have, who makes the decision under what condition, who takes responsibility, who does the after-action report. If the AI makes a decision, who's responsible for that? If before war, you have the ethics of war, who starts the war, under what conditions? During the war, what targets are taken out, what kind of targets can be taken out, what is every country has an idea of safe harbor, i.e. targets you can't take out, targets that need special authorization, targets that need different kinds of action reports. You have different kinds of segmentation inside data sources. So without going into any details in the Ukraine or other countries, you have very different data sources. They're structured in a different way. You have security issues. If you're working at war, as everyone in this room would know, you can't supply all your data sources, i.e. your asset sources, your human ingredient, to everyone on the warfield, even by proxy through an algorithm, because that can be deciphered. So how do you run algorithms and run targeting packages where these things are paramount so the adversary doesn't immediately know what you're doing, how you're doing it, and can replicate it? And then in the civilian context, this is a heavily regulated environment, for example, in Europe. You can't just run interjurisdictional AI on data sets in healthcare, legal, pharmaceuticals, and any of the interjurisdictional AI is, for lots of good reasons, would not be allowed legally or, in my view, ethically. So how do you make the AI or digitalization work in that context? That's something we've spent the last 5 years building. And what's super interesting now is it was a joke. And when I was giving you this quote, I largely just got ridiculed by my academic friends. But I think it's pretty obvious to people in this room, not as obvious maybe to people outside this room, but the ability to dominate the war battlefield on our ethical terms, meaning where we can control who does what and under what circumstances, will define who writes the law and how it's interpreted. This maybe is less controversial in Europe. It is particularly controversial, I think, in academic circles in which I lingered. But I view it as a banality and a fact. And certainly the fact that AI is not an incrementally better technology like maybe mortars and tanks where one country has a slight advantage. It is completely logarithmic and nonlinear. And so, yeah, that's a lot. But
right. When we talk about wars, we talk about kind of mortars and tanks, but in fact, it's data processing is now the new superpower that is enabling the Ukrainians to more than match the Russians.
Well, yeah, it used to be that something like an analytic package plus, yes, and what I'm saying on top of it is the differential lift by advanced augmented or digitalized or AI is so great that powers that know how to implement this, build upon it, can defeat powers that have been spending $65 billion a year over decades. There's so much about this war that can't be discussed in public. I don't think that's exactly how this went down, but people in the room will know more than that about that than I. So I don't think that's actually a fair assessment. And were that true, then you're assuming that the capacity, first of all, there's offensive cyber and there's offensive targeting. I'm in the offensive targeting. What we build, MetaConstellation, is in the offensive targeting business. It's a different business. But I would say, so what I think is we are at the very, very, very early days of AI, but in the last 6 months, we went from a world where AI was, and digitalized targeting and in general, like ability to take out targets, you could call it a digitalized kill chain, whatever you want to call it. It was either something for a highly erudite ethics discussion, which I find fascinating, or something that someone was pitching you to buy where the results were going to be a steak dinner. And this has now shifted to your ability to identify the right technology and implement it will determine what happens on the battlefield. And I don't think there's any dispute about that. In fact, one of the major things we need to do in the West is realize this lesson is completely understood by China and Russia. And we still spend a very small amount of our budgets on this kind of technology. So if I obviously very in favor of the general budget staying even, growing inflation, going more in inflation. But if you look at budgets in the West, what are we spending that's differentiated from our adversaries? In business, you have a banality where you try to invest where people don't compete well against you. What we do very well in the West is figure out distributed systems that are powered by software that will allow you to fight. And this is a very specialized way of building things. This is why our software companies have done very well, quite frankly, most of them from the West Coast of the US. But this is why battle readiness that works this way is way. But what we need to learn is, wait a minute, what are we focused on? Who is making the decisions about acquiring advanced AI, digitalization, and what part of the budget goes? Have they ever implemented something that works? By the way, very basic things. You're going to get bombarded by various software products. Has the software ever been used in the battlefield? Should be the first question. Software is not a theoretical thing. I spent the first part of my life as an academic. There are a lot of theoretically relevant questions. The first question in a software context is, who's used it? How have they used it? What are the results? You can't, these things take 5, 6 years to build if you're very good at it. And you need access to the battlefield. Like, you can't build these things in a lab. So one of the advantages, quite frankly, we've had is we've been on the battlefield. Why have we had that advantage? It's one of these bug feature things because everyone in the Silicon Valley was bereft of common sense. They were busy exporting things to adversaries and corroding our system with carcinogens in the context of the consumer internet, so we got access to the battlefield.
So how, for the people in the room who are actually trying to buy this software, how do they know what software works, given it's all shrouded in secrecy and no one will really tell you?
Anybody in this room, I presume, who's buying software can get on the phone and talk to the people who are using the software. That's not their problem. The problem is what happens after you find out when it works. Is anyone at the top who's making these decisions talking to the people who are proxy on the battlefield? What portion of your budget goes to it? Probably 99% of your budget is going to very valuable things and not this kind of thing. So you need to have a wider swath. By the way, you also need a wider swath because you're going to do new things that aren't going to work.